I've spent 4 months building a mangrove swamp in Minecraft, and well, it's pretty good. I like this quite a bit. It's done, and I think it's about time we talk a little bit more in depth about it. There's a lot of things to talk about, to go over, and to kind of explain on what I did and why I did it. So I think there's a couple places we could start here, but I think the trees might be a good place to start because, well, we did them first, and because we spent so much time on them. So I think I'll start with that, and let's go ahead and get into it. The first tree we made was the one behind me, right here, and it wasn't really intended to be part of a mangrove swamp. It was actually just intended to be a little starter base. You can see that there's a couple other ones dotted around here and there. This was kind of near spawn, so this is where we ended up kind of settling, and like just fished a bit towards the beginning of the season. And so that's all this tree was intended to be, and I didn't really do any research or thinking about this beforehand. I actually wasn't planning on making a starter base at all, and after I kind of decided, yeah, I need a starter base, this is what I ended up making, and it's not very realistic or accurate to anything. I kind of was mostly going off of what mangrove trees look like in Minecraft rather than what they look like in real life. But as I kind of continued the season, I figured I needed something to build in the meantime while I was gathering resources, so I expanded my starter base out into this whole mangrove swamp. And I pivoted heavily into a much more realistic style of mangrove tree. And in doing that, I had to do a lot of research in what mangrove trees actually looked like, how they were structured, different types of mangrove trees and where they grow and why they grow in the places they grow, how they've adapted to those environments. And I've came up with kind of 3 styles of mangrove tree for this swamp. And they were inspired by 3 different types of mangrove that we have here in the United States. Those are the red mangrove, which have these really iconic prop roots holding them up out of the water to provide air to the tree and to its roots. And we have black mangroves, which are less iconic. They don't have the same kind of prop root structure that holds up the tree out of the water, but they do have roots that stick straight up out of the water called numetophores. They grow a little bit more inland compared to the red mangroves, so we have a weird example right here where I kind of was blurring the lines between the two, mixing them together. So we have a red mangrove that's a little bit more inland than a black one right here, but for the most part the red mangroves are the furthest out into the water. And the third type is the white mangrove, and these are a little bit different. They can kind of sometimes have both prop roots and numetophores, or neither, or just one of the two. And so that was kind of a little bit of a difficult challenge to kind of conquer, come up with a solution for. And I think I did a good job of kind of distinguishing the 3 different types of tree for the swamp. But it's still, I think, a little like interesting kind of thing that I tried to pull off here with 3 different types of tree. And I think it all worked out. I really like the red mangroves, especially. If you can kind of like look around the swamp, you can kind of see why. These are just really cool looking. The root structures are just really iconic for mangroves. I mean, it's just really cool. The first mangrove of this type, so not the first one I ever built, but the first one I did in the more realistic style, was this one over here, and you can see it looks a little bit different than all the other mangroves. Each mangrove I did by hand, kind of on the fly without any sort of plan. I didn't like rotate and copy the same tree over and over again. I see a lot of people do that because it saves a lot of time, but I kind of like to keep things a little bit more interesting. And each tree has its own unique characteristics to it, even though within a type of tree they have similar characteristics. So we still have the prop roots holding things up, and it's sitting out in the water here, but it has that just kind of like unique shape to it that I really like. There's a lot of trees that I could talk about in depth individually, but we don't really need to do that. I also did little tiny versions, little saplings of each of the different types of mangrove. So we have little like black mangrove right there, just kind of sitting there. We have a red mangrove over in this direction, out here, that's kind of holding up itself with prop roots there. I think it all looks really cool and it is really interesting, but this isn't the only thing we did. As you can see, there's quite a few open grassy areas in the swamp. So let's talk about those next. There's actually 3 different grassy areas dotted around the swamp that are big and open like this, and I tried to make them as realistic and also as unique as possible, which I don't know if I did a good job about the, realism part, but I think the unique part definitely comes through because they all kind of have their own characteristics, and I think it all makes sense. So let me explain what I mean by that. In swamps, a big influence on the way the kind of like terrain works and moves and everything like that is water, of course. You have often rivers and different sources of water flowing in and depositing a bunch of mud and sediment and sand and everything else. And I tried to replicate that a little bit in how these islands are shaped and how they kind of like grow grass and the way the mud and stuff looks. So I think that's especially evident with this island. You have these streaks that come through this mud where the water has pushed the mud away a little bit more and kind of created low spots that are a little bit more wet than the spots that are growing grass, because the grass has had a little bit more time to grow on these higher areas of the mud. And I think that kind of makes sense. I don't really know that there would be this much grass on a place like this in real life, but I think it works out. We also have the other areas though that I can go a little bit more in depth on. We have, as we go inland, a little bit less of an impact of what the water is actually doing, because as we go inland, even though I'm not going vertically up more blocks, we are kind of increasing in elevation a little bit. So in this one, we do have still streaks left by the water, where we have like old river banks and mud that's kind of pulled up here. But we also have more higher areas that are a little bit bigger. We have a lot more grass on this island in a lot bigger patches. We also have water. We have little pools of water that have kind of just accumulated in the low areas of this island. And I think that adds another little detail that makes this even more swampy. We already have mud, but now we actually have water and stuff for people to get stuck in. But we have our last little island here, and this one's once again even more different. We don't really have streaks left by water here anymore because we're getting to the point to where we're really inland. So the only things that are really causing mud are the pools of water that we have dotted around, and of course the shoreline itself. But for the most part, we have a lot of big grassy areas in this island, and I think that all works out really well. So we have these 3 main islands that are open and grassy like this, but we have one more island, as the sun's setting here, that is not so flat. This area is not nearly as open, but it is pretty grassy. If we look around here, we do have quite a bit of grass under these trees, or in between kind of these trees, where that it's a little bit more light could come down and allow the grass to grow. I really like this area, but as you can tell, it's pretty different. All the areas in the swamp are unique to each other, but this area specifically is kind of our most high up area in the swamp. It's not really a highland because it's still a swamp, but it's kind of the highest land in the swamp. It has multiple blocks that you can jump up here to kind of reach the top of this hill. And this is where our white mangroves grow. They don't really grow anywhere else in the swamp, and that's kind of intentional. White mangroves they kind of grow above the high tide line, and all the other types of mangrove kind of grow within the intertidal range. Red mangroves will grow in areas where it's even flooded during low tide occasionally. But for the most part, I wanted this area that's up here to be above the water, which makes it a whole lot less swampy than the rest of the areas in the swamp. But it does kind of still work. I think it still looks really cool. And of course, there's some really nice trees on top of the hill there. We also have other details scattered around the swamp in this area and in others. We have birds in the trees, and in the sky we have leaf litter and firefly bushes and you know, frogs dotted around. There's quite a few details. I guess I'll start with the leaf litter that's dotted around the swamp. Leaf litter actually plays a pretty important role in the ecology of real-life mangrove swamps, and I wanted it to, because of that role, include it here. I got inspired after watching some documentaries and doing some research, and kind of learning about the role that leaf litter and decaying leaves and stuff on the floor of a mangrove swamp actually plays, which is actually pretty important. It's really cool. I won't bore you with all the details because I'm mostly because I'm not the guy who should really be teaching all this stuff, but it's pretty cool. Do some of your own research if you're interested. But we obviously have other details as well, some of which are a little bit more animated. The birds in the sky are pretty cool. We have a couple different types up there. Let me get on the trees so I can show you a little bit closer up. I was inspired by a design by Jake Kelton Crafts. He does animated builds like pretty frequently. I think I just broke these, which is unfortunate, but I'll try to fix them if I can. There we go. And these birds flap their wings. And they kind of do their whole animated loop here, and I think that's really cool. You don't really have too many animated things in Minecraft, so whenever you're able to do something like this, I think it just always adds something. But we have obviously different kind of designs here. We have white ones and we have pink ones. The pink ones were inspired by a specific type of waterfowl, and the white ones were just kind of inspired by all the different types of waterfowl that you'll find in a mangrove swamp in general. But the pink ones specifically were inspired by spoonbills. We even have some pink fence posts in the trees because of that. And spoonbills are just one of the types of waterfowl that are in mangrove swamps, as well as other swamps in the United States. They have spoon-shaped beaks, and that's why they're called spoonbills. And we weren't really able to add that kind of detail to these, but we were able to add the colors pattern that they usually have, which is pink with a white head and neck and a gray bill. And of course we have all these other birds that are just adding a little layer of detail to the swamp, which I think is always cool. But as far as the other details, we have in our trees here more birds. We have fence posts to kind of look like birds from a distance, and we have parrots dotted around the trees. Now these parrots were hard to get. There's a pretty large number of parrots. I don't know the exact number, but it's probably close to 100 different parrots in the swamp, and they're all the gray kind, which means that we had to spend a lot of time getting parrots. There are ways in which to farm parrots, and if you like have a, you know, kind of like a hollowed out chunk perimeter kind of thing somewhere in a jungle, then like you can maybe kind of farm parrots. But we did not do that. We instead ran around a jungle for hours and hours, and eventually got all the parrots we need, which is pretty cool. But that's not our only details in the swamp. It is kind of getting to nighttime though, so we'll sleep first, and then I'll explain a little bit more about some of the other stuff. You might have noticed these blue parrots. These are weird. They weren't really intended to be part of the swamp. I fell in a hole. They were actually just part of the starter base, which this starter base wasn't really intended to be part of the swamp, but I needed a place to put my parrots in the beginning of the season, and so I dotted them around my build. I have some red ones in the branches and on the dock there. I have some green ones, blue and yellow ones. We even have some gray ones in there. They're all over that tree. But yeah, they weren't really intended to be part of the details in the swamp, so I'm leaving them here probably for now at least. But yeah, they're kind of out of place. Some of the details that were actually intended for the swamp, though, are these little frogs that are dotted around the place. We have them hopping around, croaking, making frog noises, and I think they're a nice little detail to have in a place like this. They're tied to fence post under the ground. You can kind of see the leads show up sometimes, and they won't run away because of that, which is pretty cool. We don't really have to worry about resupplying frogs into our swamp or anything like that. But of course, there is another detail right here. We have some crocodiles. These are kind of difficult to make. There's a few designs that I have dotted around the swamp, but really they're kind of difficult to design in the first place. Obviously, like getting the resources for this and like kind of placing them, that's not too hard. But designing a crocodile or any organic really on this scale is pretty difficult to do. So I think I did a pretty good job. There's a few things that I would like to, look a little different. I would have liked to be able to have a design of one of these crocodiles look like it had its mouth open or something like that. I think that kind of thing would have been really cool. We have a couple cool different things going on with like banner patterns. We have eyes for the different crocodiles in different shapes and stuff on different banners, and I think it looks cool. What's really cool is that this banner will actually glow in the dark because it has a torch underneath, and so it kind of like has a little globe to the crocodile eyes. But these don't, unfortunately, so it's not like a thing that all the crocodile eyes do. But one of the things that makes this design a little bit more unique than most is that there's a camel underneath it. This is pretty weird, and I think the best way to explain it is just by having you listen to some of the camel noises that play in Minecraft, and you might be able to kind of understand that they sound a little bit similar to crocodiles. They're pretty quiet though. You don't really hear them too well in the swamp, especially with all the other noises like the frogs and the birds in the trees and stuff. But whenever you do hear it, I think it really is like a cool rumble that you'll hear from a crocodile. So we have those underneath all of these crocodiles dotted around the swamp, and I think that just adds a little bit of atmosphere. We have other sounds, of course, coming from other mobs like the parrots and the frogs, and we also have sounds at night, at least from the firefly bushes. Unfortunately, it's only at night. I would have really liked to have sounds play during the day that sound like bugs, like kind of flying around and stuff. We have the particles, which I think is cool around in the day because we have some firefly bushes under the ground, but they don't make the noise, unfortunately. So that's something that is cool that can happen, but doesn't usually happen, unfortunately. But we can actually run around this area at night. We don't really have to worry about mobs or anything because it's all lit up. We have a couple different carpets of a couple different colors to kind of try and blend it in as best we could with candles underneath, and each of these have a candle of two candles, and that's because the light level that two candles give off is pretty small, it's pretty faint. So although it does allow us to light up the area around it pretty effectively, it doesn't look like the land is glowing in the dark at night, which I think is a pretty important thing to try and prevent if you can, and we can. So that's what I tried to do, and I think that's pretty much it for the details, really. I mean, there's a couple little things that I'm probably forgetting about. I mean, we have different types of shrubbery and stuff growing, but that's pretty much it, I think. So I guess now that we know what all I did, why did I do it? Truth be told, I don't know. I got no idea, really. I have had quite a few swamp-related build ideas and plans. I guess it's just kind of been inspired to build swamps recently, which is weird. I don't know what that's about, but okay. Either way, I've been building swamps. I've been thinking about swamps a lot, and I kind of starting out the season here, you need a starter base, and that's kind of why I ended up with a mangrove tree. The build I have, the future build I have planned, doesn't involve mangrove trees, but I wanted swamps to kind of be a central kind of theme to the season. So I guess I kind of was thinking swamp, coastal, kind of tropical. We have a jungle in the background there. I guess mangrove tree kind of fit, So I built a mangrove tree, and then after a while, I still needed kind of something to fill in the season, something a little bit more creative than just redstone projects, until I have, all the resources necessary to actually start building my build. And so that ends up being this. And because of the mangrove tree that we've already built, I kind of expanded it out into a much bigger mangrove swamp. And I think it worked out. I think this is a really cool build. And I kind of like it, I guess. Other than that, I don't really know why I kind of wanted it to be as realistic as I wanted it to be. I don't know why I wanted everything to be as unique and custom. Like every tree has its own design to it. I don't know. I don't know what I was doing. But I think it all came together into a really cool build. I have a future build planned, like I've been talking about, and it is a swamp. Well, it's partially a swamp. There is a town involved and a few other things that I think are going to be really cool. But for the most part, a large portion of it is going to be a swamp. But it's not going to be a mangrove swamp. It's going to be more of a freshwater kind of swamp, and it should be pretty interesting. I'm pretty excited to get into it and kind of start building that project. But yeah, I don't think we have really time to do that in this episode. We're just enjoying the build. It's finished. We're just resting for a little bit, trying to get kind of the last batch of resources ready for our next build, and kind of just hanging out. So I think this is a good place to end this episode. Kind of just talking about the swamp, I guess. And yeah, we'll come back next episode. I'm thinking we're gonna start our next project, which is gonna be pretty interesting. I'm pretty excited for it. But yeah, I will just kind of end the episode here. Thank you guys all for watching. God bless.